Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we operate, live and gather, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We're thrilled to have so many people join us today. We have many hundred people on this webinar, which is wonderful to see. It shows there's a great level of interest in what's been happening in this space over the last many weeks. Today's webinar is the first in a new webinar series that we're launching and that we'll have over the next few months that will feature relevant and I hope thought-provoking content trying to help you gain an outside-in perspective and support your thinking as you navigate your business through the COVID pandemic and beyond. So for today's webinar, we're going to look at the immediate impact that COVID-19 has had on the e-commerce industry and what this means for the future of online shopping. It seems like ages ago, but since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, which was, believe it or not, 11th of March, online shopping has boomed. The week after that, Australia posted online purchases up 28% year on year, before climbing to a peak of 136% year on year growth around Easter. And it was just an amazing, for those of you who remember, an amazing Easter period. That made it the biggest online shopping weekend for Australia on record, overtaking Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales last year. So an amazing period in terms of online shopping and its growth here in Australia. To put this in perspective, an average of 1.6 million households bought something online each week last year, so in the calendar year 2019. This increased to 2.6 million each week in April 2020. So let me repeat that, an extra million people bought something online each week through that period. At the beginning of March, online share of total retail spend was about 11%. Without stealing Franzi's thunder, who's on us in a moment, our early estimates now show online share of total retail spend in April is about nearly 18%, just under 17.8%. That's obviously a huge increase in such a short period of time. But the question is, will this growth continue as lockdown restrictions ease and we start to go about our normal lives again? How have consumer preferences changed over this period? What are the implications for pure play and omni-channel retailers, small, medium and large? And that's really what we're here today to explore. So I'll now introduce Ben Franzi. He's our GM of Parcel and Express Services, and he's going to kick us off with a view of the online retail landscape. He's going to share the online shop trends that we've witnessed during the pandemic, and then we'll be joined by two influential leaders in Australian e-commerce that we're lucky to have with us today. So I'll now hand on to Franzi.
Thank you, Gary. And as you can probably all see, I'm in casual gear working from home as the new world has moved on in terms of working from home. I'm going to spend only about 5 or so minutes quickly stepping through some of the core stats that have really happened in e-com since the COVID period. And Gary touched on a few of them as we go, but we have seen massive growth, and during the period we've seen over 80% growth compared to the same time last year, and some of that even peaked out to 90% growth. So when I look at April as an isolated month, we were seeing 90% growth from an e-commerce perspective. The busiest period that we actually experienced was the 4 days after Easter, and if I compare those 4 days to Black Friday, Cyber Monday and the couple of days for that week, it was a growth even on top of that, which we thought we'd never experienced. And then you're also starting to see really big shifts away from physical retail into online. So when we think about the penetration that we were experiencing pre-COVID, we were thinking more like sort of 11s to 12% penetration. But during the COVID period, we've really been seeing 17% penetration. And Gary talked about the weekly stats around the households, and we also measure that monthly as well. And you're getting massive growth from a monthly perspective, 31% more households in buying. And the really key component of that is they're buying a lot more regularly. So instead of just buying once a month, we're seeing big growth numbers in the categories that are buying 3-4 times a month, even if not weekly. So it's not only getting new households, we've got in the region of 200,000 new households, new consumers coming into the market, but they're coming into the market strong and buying regularly. And all the literature points to a consumer behaviour being locked around about 7-8 weeks. And once you lock that consumer behaviour, they don't go back. So we don't tend to see consumers then resort back into physical retail because they've started to buy those goods, started to buy the wine consistently online, and therefore they don't tend to progress back once we even see retail moving forward. So which industries and how has industries played out? So right at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw an actual decline across fashion. When people started to get locked down, started to work from home, fashion as an overall category actually went backwards year on year, which was being massively offset by the panic buying around beer, wine and spirits. As an Australian nation, we couldn't do without our beer, wine and spirits. So we did this massive buy-up of beer, wine and spirits. But because we weren't able to go out, there was no nightclubs, pubs or cafes or restaurants open, we did stop buying online from a fashion perspective. So the first wave of if you like, that panic buying was beer, wine and spirits. The second wave was we realised that this is going to be locked down for a while. We're going to be working from home for a reasonable amount of time. And we started to buy office furniture and equipment. So we did this big buy-up of office equipment. And then the final wave is, oh, my God, I'm going to have to entertain my kids for a period of time. And then I'm going to have to buy toys and gifts. So we saw the third wave of panic buying around toys and gifts. Once we got through this panic buying, though, we've now normalised, and almost all industries, including fashion, have started to get average growth of somewhere between 110 to sort of 60, 70% growth year on year. And that we've seen consistently now over a number of weeks to be where we think the e-commerce growth is going to land moving forward over a period of time. So we've started to see it really align back to normality, if you like that expression, in terms of where we are today. But we are consistently seeing strong growth week on week. So as I said previously, this has now been locked down. Consumers are locked their behaviour. So we've moved beyond this fashion of panic buying, and we've now moved into a normality phase. So very quickly, I'm going to ask you guys to do a poll, so we'll get to the results in a moment. But what do you think is going to be where the online as a percentage of total retail sales ends up post-COVID? So let's say December, January next year, where do we think online will actually land? Do you think it will be greater than 20%, below 10%, so we'll go backwards? Or obviously the other two conversations are the 11 and the 15%. So have a quick vote. To give you some of the hints, what we saw pre-COVID is we were sitting about 11.5%. 12 months before that, we were sitting sort of around 9%. And it wasn't that long ago that we were talking around the 5 to 7%. During the COVID period, as I mentioned earlier, we were seeing the 17% growth rates. I'll give you a second or two to quickly have a click on the button. All right, let's have a look at the results. There we go. So 9% of the people on the line are suggesting it's actually going to drop back a little bit in terms of the 11 to 14%. The vast majority are suggesting it's going to normalise somewhere between the 15 and 19%. And I really like category B. I'm hoping it would continue to escalate and grow up to 20%. But we really think that when we look at the movements going forward, that 15 to 19% is the likely category. But yeah, look, I'd love it to be plus 20%. I think we'll get to the plus 20%, but I'm probably saying we're 1 or 2 years away from that plus 20%. So we do think when we're looking at the data we're seeing at the moment, we think post-COVID it will normalise around the 15%. We think that normalisation around 15% will be for a number of reasons. The first is we've got to keep the new shoppers engaged. Gary and I have both mentioned how many new shoppers have come into the market. We have locked those consumer behaviours in, but there will be some drift back to retail as we see retail opening. And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks when retail has been opening up. There has been a slight softening, if you like, of the e-commerce numbers. So the challenge as an industry for us all, whether that be a freight provider or seller, is how do we keep the new shoppers engaged? The second one is we want those shoppers to continue to shop at the same levels they are. So everyone buying once a week from an online perspective, where we're seeing the big growth, is really important. So how do you keep those shoppers buying at the same level of regularity is a key input to what we see the overall growth will be. And as we start to move back into the office, get away from working from home, a lot of what Australia Post is thinking about is how do we ramp up the whole convenience around day delivery, convenience around location, because it won't be that we're all now back 5 days a week into the office. It will be 3 days a week, 4 days a week. It'll be flexible as we move forward. And the final big push that we think will help towards the 15% and maybe even a little bit more is a lot of the retailers have really pushed hard. The physical retailers have pushed hard into online more than ever before over the more recent COVID period, and have all now actively started to look at closing stores. So we've heard announcements from the Accent Group in terms of closing of stores, Myer closing stores, Target closing stores. So we have our big retailers now looking at physically reducing their footprint, and once we have that, they don't want to obviously give up the revenue associated with the sales, so they're going to have to push harder and harder online. So they're the kind of the three reasons why we think once we settle back and down into some level of normality, we will end up being around about that 15%. So I hope that gave you a sort of a very quick insight in terms of where e-commerce is going. We have our e-commerce report coming out towards the end of this week, early next week. So jump online onto our websites and other bits and pieces and get a more detailed copy, and always happy to handle questions as we move forward. So thank you very much. Gary, back to you.
Thanks, Ben. That was great to get those insights, and it's great to be able to break them down in this way to just understand what categories are being impacted, who's buying and their shopping habits, and how those shopping habits are changing. So when the report, certainly you can ask questions through the remainder of this webinar, but the report will give you a lot more granular information by category that you can really drill down into, and hopefully help you as you plan the future. One thing I will say is, and we were debating this morning as an executive team, there is also the overlay of the economic the environment out there economically. I'm sure many of you have discussions both at work and with family and friends on weekends about JobKeeper and JobSeeker and when they end and the impact. And I see it personally. My eldest daughter on JobKeeper right now and actually getting slightly more money than she would have and spending. There's a lot of discretionary spend, but that will start to ease. As Ben mentioned, that we've seen it slightly ease as shops reopen, and that's a switch back to physical channels to a small extent, but then there's just that economic piece as well. So for that, I'd like to now welcome our panellists to explore how these changes have impacted the industry firsthand and understand their thoughts around what the future holds for the sector. So I'll start with Paul Greenberg. Many of you may know Paul. He's from his work with Nora over many years. He was the founder and non-executive director of the National Online Retail Association, known as Nora. He's often referred to as the godfather of online retail in Australia, but he also brings significant global experience and recently joined as vice chair of the Federation of International Retail Associations, known as FIRA. And this means he's well connected and credentialed in not only what's happening in the domestic market, but of course the global retail environment. And we do look for trends around the world and what they may mean for Australia. And the other panel member is Sarah Timmerman. We're really glad to have Sarah with us, who's living and breathing the experience right now. Sarah is the owner and CEO of online fashion company Beyond Beginning Boutique. Now, she founded the company back in 2008 at the age of 21 years, and clearly a bit younger than me. And I don't know that many of us have been through a pandemic like this before, but Sarah started during the global financial crisis, which was interesting in itself, but this is unprecedented what we've experienced now. So Sarah also has an amazing story of pivoting quickly through this pandemic to survive and thrive through this period as well. Before we get started, though, there are some questions already coming in, but I just want to reiterate that you'll see a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, or on your screen, I should say. I'm planning to leave some time at the end to ask questions of the panel that you may have. So please submit them as they come to time using that button, and we'll try to answer as many as we can through the webinar. So I'll start with Sarah. Now, I mentioned just now that you built a highly successful online fashion business called Beginning Boutique over the last 12 years. But when the pandemic hit us in Australia, quickly pivoted to stand up a new business within weeks. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I think it's called AU Medic Supply, but a little bit about that business and what led you to start it up and what's happened in the last many weeks.
Yeah, so my sister's actually a junior doctor on the Gold Coast and was a part of the COVID clinics and was feeling actually quite terrified at the lack of equipment that she was provided. She actually ended up buying her own masks. So what started as an initial search to help her find masks, because there were none available to purchase, developed into a business. So we started to sell masks that are CE certified, but also just regular masks that you need in a warehouse, that sort of thing. Our main clients are buying masks for their workforce as opposed to doctors, but we then moved into hand sanitizer and things like that as well, just with the pure aim of being able to keep our staff busy during this period, because on, I think it was March 22nd, that was when we were really like, what the heck is going on in the world right now? So just trying to find solutions to problems and products that people wanted to buy at that point in time. I'm very grateful for the recovery that happened shortly after that. But during that period, we decided to move into medical supplies as well.
So that's amazing. And I guess that business continues to, there'll still be, as lockdown eases and people coming back to work, I suspect people will be using masks, and certainly I think there'll be a change view on how we keep ourselves, our hands clean and each other safe through the next little while. One other thing that I observed too was just the, buying quality product and knowing that it would do the job. And there were a lot of products flooded the market, but just being really sure about the products that you were, that there was trusted in the products that you were selling. I'm sure that was important too. Okay, so Ben, you mentioned earlier just thinking about what happens over the next many months. So we're starting to, thank God, see lockdown restrictions lift, and consumers are going back what I'd say is a new normal. What do you see happening? You did a poll earlier, but interested in your view. You're scrutinising this every day, and I know feeding back to us every day, and it's constantly moving. So what's your view on what's going to happen in terms of online shopping growth?
Yeah, it's interesting what we define as the new norm as the starting question. So we're not predicting when we look at it that everyone goes back into pre-COVID lifestyle immediately. You think about the travel industry, it's likely to be affected for at least 18 months. And then one of the other big trends we're seeing at the moment is the whole Buy Australia piece, the real push around nationalisation and coming back into buying Australian. So we're suggesting that from over the next period of time that flexible is going to be one of the key words, flexible around where we work, flexible around how you get deliveries, flexible around your shopping habits. It's really important that fashion comes back into the space, and it has. So we've started to see fashion become really strong again, instead of getting into that 60 to 80% growth year on year, because at least 1 in 3 items that we buy online historically has been fashion. And that's really important for a good, strong e-commerce moving forward. And the other really pleasing part is we haven't seen the other industries drop away. So as we've started to get into this new norm, Gary, those other industries have started to stay at quite high penetration rates and quite high growth rates, and now it's being supplemented by fashion as well. So as I said previously, we do expect it to kind of be 15%, but the longer we continue to operate in this sort of semi-isolation, if you like, the work from home, the more you continue to embed the online buying behaviours. And it's just really interesting that, like, the final point I made is historically what we would have seen is a real peak around people buying 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night. That was the peak online shopping window. You got home, you sat down, you had something to eat, you put the kids to bed and everything else. That was the peak online window. We've seen growth now coming between the hours of 2 to 5. So when you're working from home, it must be, I get bored after lunch. I've been sitting on video conferences all day. Let's do a little bit of shopping. So we're starting to see growth now coming back into the 2 to 5 p.m. period. So shopping behaviours are actually changing in line with where we now work, and I expect that to continue as we move forward.
Yeah, it is. Those times are interesting. I know I was, yesterday I was I've been deferring it, but looking to book some time away with the family, and I would have typically done it late at night after a day's work or travel, but was doing it in the middle of the afternoon. So when I had a quiet break from all those calls, it's amazing to see those changes. So Paul, just on that note, we tend to have lagged behind here in Australia in terms of our international counterparts as it relates to online shopping growth. What do you think has the pandemic done? Are there permanent changes? We say it takes consumers a certain amount of time to change behaviours, and then they are changed. And what does it mean in terms of retailers having to rethink their online presence? Particularly, you spoke to us as a leadership team a few weeks back about that, but the omni-channel players having to rethink their online strategy. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure thing, Gary, and lovely to be speaking to everyone today. And we've got such a big group of people out listening in the ecosystem. I think first up, if I may, I've always certainly over the last 5-6 years, I've challenged that view that Australia is behind. I think we're a very tech-led society, and I think our retailers might have had a bit of a jump on them, but I think both the pure players as well as the established retailers have done some incredible work over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think we're right up there with our counterparts, and certainly with this FIRA group that I'm now the vice chair of, I think we're flying a very solid flag here in Australia. So I think, well, what we've certainly seen, and Ruslan Kogan put it very well, this sort of acceleration. Ruslan says in sort of 3 months, we've sort of established a beachhead of around 5 years, what it would normally take in terms of the growth of digital retail. He would say that because he's a pure play online retailer, but I think we've certainly seen, and Ben's numbers have spoken to that the consumer direct experience has really stepped up a notch, and I think we've all appreciated perhaps a little bit more. We might have taken it a bit for granted pre-COVID when we were free to travel, visit stores, but the home delivery has become quite sacred and precious to me and my family. So we've really, when that red van comes up the driveway, it really gives us more of a thrill than perhaps what was before rather functional. So I think that's a key point. The tale of two cities, the best of times, the worst of times, might mean the best, the best of channels, the worst of channels, but I don't think it is that. I know Ben and I over the years, we've always spoken about customers shop by brand, not by channel, and we've got to be careful as an industry not to over-focus on the channel perspective, but clearly consumers, the bias towards home delivery and online consumer direct is there. I think the established retailers, the so-called physical retailers, are definitely shape-shifting. Ben mentioned Accent Group, City Chic. They're closing stores, but I think what we're going to see coming out of that improved in-store experience, very much more focused on the brand rather than the transaction. But of course, backed as been illustrated by the strong growth in consumer direct. That's where some of the big numbers and the sales growth will come from. I think we're also lastly seen, the concept of alliances and consolidation stepping up. Kogan acquiring Matt Blatt quite recently. We've certainly had some retailers that haven't been able to scale with the chains that have closed. But I think we are going to see more consolidation, more alliances. I'm quite excited about that. West Farmers pre-COVID acquiring Catch Groups. I think a fine example of what's going to come. And we'll see more of and I'm sorry to use the term, Ben, but I will, more of the phygital retail in the years ahead. So yeah, I share a bit of a sense of optimism on the webinar today.
You always coining a new term, Paul, don't you? You always like to create a new term as you go.
Yeah, well, phygital, I think it's been bouncing around for a while. I can't claim, but yeah, I've been using that one for a while until the next one needs to come through. Yeah.
The other thing you did just say, Paul, that I think, and you mentioned a few weeks ago as a leadership team, is about not just focus on channel. It's not just about the channel. And I know we have a view, look at online, of course, about people buying through a digital or online channel versus through a physical store. But retailers will be looking at their digital experiences in store. which will be a critical part of the evolution for them as well. And that experience, the footprint and the experience will change. Look, speaking of attracting customers, I guess we saw new customers. Ben, you mentioned over 200,000 new households had shopped online for the first time during the pandemic. Really quite remarkable figures given Australia's population. And there typically have been a few barriers when it comes to these households adopting online shopping. And one thing I know that I hear is that the customer experience won't match the in-store experience. So, Sarah, you are, I guess, both the beginning boutique and your new business are both pure play online. So how do you go about delivering a great customer experience? And have you had to do anything differently during the pandemic to try to convert some of these customers, someone transacting for the first time to continuing to transact on a more regular basis and become a loyal online shopper?
Yeah, we've definitely had to change a lot of our customer care. So it really involved changing our returns periods, being more flexible with refunds, because as customers are more negatively affected with their salaries or potential stand downs, we want to make sure that we're supporting them and offering them refunds even outside of our terms and conditions. We also had to extend our customer care hours to support our US customers more. The US customers were obviously quite affected, and also just convincing them that this is not a normal retail experience for them. So we've had to really run a lot of customer retention management that was focused around showing them that this is not what a regular experience is. This is a COVID experience with us. So really focusing on offering those new customers something else to come back. I think that's essential as well. But also we've always been really passionate about our touch points. So we make sure that our packaging is beautiful, that the experience when they get the package is beautiful, that we have documented on our website how we take COVID seriously and how it's not an issue for them. And just making sure that obviously we're working really closely with our key suppliers like yourselves to have the best possible options for our customers at all times.
One thing that I did notice was consumers looking to what organisations are doing to protect their own people as much as the customer experience. That I saw that pop up a lot, and a lot of organisations communicate broadly about what we're doing to protect our staff, and seem to resonate with consumers, knowing that, well, I know I want to order this item, but I know the people involved in the transaction are also being looked after and are safe. So that seemed to really resonate. Paul, you, given your role with FIRA, you're pretty close to what's going on in the global space. I'm interested to hear a few things about what you've seen customer experience-wise around the world over the last few months, and how do we stack up in Australia, and who are, in your mind, who are in the space and why are they leaders, and who do you think's right during the pandemic? Given things have changed rapidly and have been very fluid, who's done really well through the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Well, I think first up, I'm sure the audience noted yesterday there was actually a very positive Pacific Standard Time. Retail was actually up 17.7% in May against an expected 8%. So I think we're seeing quite a few retailers, despite the challenges, rise to the occasion. I mean, clearly, and it's reflected in the share price of a business like Amazon. They've obviously taken the wave, taken the momentum, and have obviously doubled down on their investment in supply chain, in logistics and distribution, and I think have prospered very handsomely from that. The department stores, Gary, globally are really finding it very hard going. Our Spanish counterparts, they've got their key department stores there. Cortes Inglés is struggling. We're seeing the American department stores really having to restructure quite quickly. And I think our own Meyer and David Jones, I think that's very much a universal theme. A lot of the themes that I've seen at FIRA are very much universal. There doesn't seem to be any country-specific standouts. I think we're all going through the same challenges, which perhaps speaks to that global world, that you often reference and that Australia Post is keen to service. But in terms of the experiential customer experience, I mean, we were fortunately all at the big show in January, and I think we saw the very best in the US of great experiential retailers. I mean, the standout that many of us referenced was a growing toy business called Camp that really had three revenue streams. One is obviously selling quality toy products. The other one is events. They hold beautiful events in their themed and curated stores. And the other one is sponsorships. I mean, they have a sponsorship revenue line where a lot of brands want to get closer to them. So I think, a business like Camp is really showing the way in terms of retail stores are not just to sell stuff. There's other ways we can optimize our brand positions by using that physical collateral. So for some time now, I've been quite bullish, although my background is pure play and I love Sarah and her business. That's really where my heartland lies. I'm very bullish about the established retailers that are really optimizing their physical experience as well as their digital capabilities. I think they'll continue to do well. And really, just about any retailer that's invested over the last few years in digital should do okay, even through these challenging times as stores start to reopen and the natural shape-shifting that Ben spoke about will certainly progress and accelerate.
So, and which did you have a view on the brands that have done well here through the pandemic?
Yeah, well, look, I keep yeah, sure, Gary. I keep a great eye on the ASX, as I'm sure many of our listeners do. And I mean, Temple & Webster's share price is through the roof today. They've just announced a business update, very, very solid numbers. Rustlin, again, the pure players have done really well. It's interesting that people like Rustlin and Temple, as well as companies like Bunnings and the Reject Shop, there's a new category. And Ben, you've probably across all of this, that they're calling, we always saw retail as discretionary and non-discretionary, which essentially was grocery was non-discretionary. Now I'm hearing the term discretionary necessities. And I think that's an interesting almost third category or third leg. And I think businesses like Kogan, like MyDeal, although it's not listed, I'm quite close to the management team there, have really stormed ahead, which is terrific. And yeah, I mean, some of the ASX, some of the rises this morning pre our call are businesses like Adairs, City Chic, that are doing very well. Their share prices are solidly up today as their stores start to reopen and they start to return to trading. But I think City Chic announced that 50% of their sales in the US are online now. So dramatic numbers and dramatic shifts in the formats and the way things change. So lots of good retailers flying the flag, and we do well to keep an eye on them and where we need to as retailers, keep up and replicate best practice.
There is also, Ben, I just want to ask you as well. I figure you have an opinion on these new these new shoppers. So what's your perspective?
So just building on Paul's comment also, I think one of the companies that are doing very well is the Accent Group. I love what the Accent Group is doing from an overall experience perspective. And of course, Beginning Boutique, we can not hesitate to mention Beginning Boutique. But when we survey these customers, it still comes down to the three core shopping experience things that we can influence as an industry. The first is don't hide freight costs. Make it very clear that it's either free shipping or it's not, and have it up front, because getting to the end, they don't think they should be paying for shipping costs. If you walk into a retailer, you don't pay a shipping cost. So freight costs are still a core issue. As is returns. We always see high returns issues, free returns, etc. is a big thing. And then the final bit is just making it convenient. Different shopping times, different options around shopping times become become really critical. So they're all the three big things we always see when we come back from a consumer perspective. It hasn't changed over the years, to be honest.
Yeah. No, that's right. There've been common themes, haven't they, in terms of the barriers and people then converting and then staying, continuing to buy online. Now, Sarah, you talked just about all the, I guess, how you had to quickly mobilise. You talked about back in March, and the pandemic has had a massive impact. It came through so quickly, and businesses of all sizes had to sort of very quickly figure out how we're going to deal with this. And we faced a myriad of challenges at Australia Post, and dealing with social distancing, grounded flights. The Qantas very quickly grounded flights, and we rely heavily, aside from our freighter, dedicated freighter network, on PAX flights. And then, of course, just the surge with the buying that happened, that early panicked buying that happened. Pure play online retailers face disruption to their supply chains through all this as well, and depleted inventory. And you Sarah, you switched to you innovated in the moment and came up realising there was a need in the market. But then we saw many omni-channel retailers have convert their retail stores to almost dark stores and start working behind closed doors to pick and pack. And we had to very quickly pivot to pick up from store as well. And these retailers either had invested in their online platforms or are now have invested since, and they're looking for savings elsewhere, including on rent. And we're seeing retailers start to open but rethink that, with many reconsidering their footprint. So it's a seismic shift for all of us. But I'm interested, Sarah, in how you've had to adjust as a pure play, how you've had to adjust operations today, and then looking forward now, if there's a new normal, where are you going to have to invest to cater for this surging online demand that will likely continue?
Yeah, so we had a dramatic impact to our import, and it was pretty instantaneous as well. We are still releasing and receiving stock that was supposed to arrive in March, which is pretty dramatic, especially releasing March summer, end of summer stock in the middle of winter now can also provide challenges. So what we had to do is really rethink everything that we were doing with our suppliers, move out our ordering. We are now working to sea freight only timeframes, which is pretty dramatic and causes a lot of problems when you don't know what people are going to be buying. So we've had to change a lot of what we do internally. But in terms of managing our actual assets and what we're doing, we've had to bring forward the opening of a new warehouse. So that will be happening this year instead of next year. We're looking to make sure that we're solidifying all of our partnerships in a way that is beneficial for both, so extending out our timeframes as much as possible. So when we were selecting the property, we selected it where Australia Post would want that property to be. There were a lot of considerations that came in to make sure that we could extend timeframes and offer best customer service. I guess as well, there's been obviously massive shifts in international shopping as well. With New Zealand being in full lockdown, it meant that we really needed to consider what we could do and offer for them on a permanent basis, and also for the US. So we're looking to extend our customer care hours to match US. So I guess for us, in terms of managing the surge, it's really got to do with space and people.
Right. Okay. And I suspect that will be a consistent theme for many. So look, I think we can debate this just how much it's changed. Consumer sentiment has changed, and the permanent changes to the way people shop. Clearly, some categories have experienced temporary short-term growth and demand. Others will dominate online now being an ongoing phenomenon. So, Ben, what recommendations would you provide to businesses responding to this new reality? What do they need to think about?
Yeah, so if we've gone from, thank you, Gary, if we've gone from sort of 11% penetration up to 15% penetration, just pure volume numbers will mean that capacity needs to be thought about across everyone who's in the end-to-end supply chain, whether that be Australia Post or whether it's be a retailer. So stock, understanding where your inventory management is, what your inventory management levels look like, warehousing, how do you do pick and pack, and as Sarah talked about, even how you do customer service becomes really critical. It will come down to the customer experience or the consumer experience about wanting to stay online for those growth rates to continue. So we need to keep the same level of consumers engaged, and we need to keep those new consumers engaged. So we touched on a couple of that consumer experience perspective around offering more delivery options. I still think speed will come into the play at some point. I don't think it's a short-term thing around speed. I think speed will be a bit more of a longer-term thing now, given we've had COVID and with more people at home. But definitely think about, we mentioned it, free shipping, free returns, still very critical. but you've got to do the economics behind that as a business. You've got to work through what that is going to do from an economic perspective from your business. And then it really is about making the experience great again. I love that Sarah does the special packaging similar to Bird's Nest does their similar packaging. I like trying to still make that experience of getting that gift, if you like, arriving through the post, make it unique, make it an experiential piece. I think that keeps people excited and keeps people in the industry.
Right. That's really interesting. And I know I mentioned my daughter earlier in JobKeeper. She is certainly, there's 2 or 3 parcels a week, literally. And my study is right next to the front door. So the process is the doorbell rings, the dog barks, and she comes running down. She's 21. She comes running down the hall, and that second she'll be hit of it arriving, and the package and the way it's packaged. And she's been buying cosmetics and books and all sorts of things. Is really, I'm not normally home to see this phenomenon. I know it happens, but I've watched it in the last few months firsthand. It's really the excitement around something arriving and the packaging and how it's the unboxing is. It's really, really important, it seems. Now, Paul, it's one of the. I just want to just pivot slightly because there's a question. I've got a series of questions here in front of me from the list of the people who have joined us today, but just that does relate, I guess, to supply chain resilience too. Just around travel restrictions and online growth. Just I know in Australia, but when will things? Because a lot have been affected by an inability to get cross-border e-commerce affected. So, what's your view on how travel restrictions have impacted growth, and I know it's very hard to predict the international airlines and when they go back, but what's your perspective on how that will bounce back, or how quickly it will bounce back?
Yeah, there is a bit of what do they say? Every silver lining has a cloud, and unfortunately, certainly on the luxury end, inbound tourism to Australia has been a big driver of growth in the luxury and the department store sector. And I think we're really missing that inbound tourism, especially from China. Tourism and retail are tied at the hip. So, from my perspective, it can't happen soon enough. I really can't wait for borders to open. But I think we did hear the Simon Birmingham, one of our federal ministers, saying that nothing before the end of the calendar year, which is a bitter pill, I think, to swallow. I think we're all hoping, whether it's a bit of skiing in Queenstown, that New Zealand and Australia have a little bit of a bubble going and we open up reciprocally. I think that would be a start. But I think we're still on the luxury end going to feel it a bit with the slowdown in tourism. And yeah, sorry, Gary, I don't have any sort of visibility with my association roles of when that'll happen. Naturally, government have been very communicative. And, fingers crossed. I just want to do a quick shout out while we were chatting about supply chain challenges to Australian shoppers who I think have actually been incredible over this period, both in store. I mean, I think they've been amazing. It's always been a bit awkward for us, but we've kept social distance. I think we've done an amazing job. And I think Sarah is a bit of a poster child for when things go a bit pear-shaped, as they sometimes do. Communication is the key. I think Australian shoppers have been very patient over this COVID period. As long as merchants, as retailers, we've communicated with them. And I think we've all done quite a good job, and including yourselves, Ben and Gary and team, to keep customers in the loop. And Sarah, I'm sure you'll concur with that. As long as we're communicating with them, they're flexible, but I think silence can be a little bit of death in these times. And I think Sarah's done an incredible job since she started the business in 2008 to navigate some challenges and have such a strong growing brand. So shout out to you and your shoppers and your customers, Sarah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, it's 100% communication. And I deeply appreciate what Australia Post has done to keep us in the loop so that we can keep our customers in the loop. I think there's nothing worse as a customer when the brand doesn't know what's going on with their own business, because Australia Post is beginning boutique. Like I wish that there was more financial rewards in that, but it really is like Australia Post is the face of our brand. So when there's a mistake made on the Australia Post side, it's not Australia Post's fault, it's our fault. Like at every step of the way, like if there is an issue, the brands are too connected. Like it's just this thing where the better the communication is on our side as well, the better Australia Post gets treated. It's this big circle.
And look, I do want to come back to you just on on that international, on just what you're seeing. But before I do, Sarah, I think the big takeaways for us have been transparency and communication. And I think saying when things have gone wrong and it's okay to call that out, and what we're doing to fix it, as Paul said, silence is purgatory. And I think we got better and better at that through the period. The first few weeks, we were learning very quickly, but I've got to say that I was speaking to a colleague from I won't say which, but another postal service around the world, and they didn't do that, and they've really suffered. They were really, and they're now doing the rounds with customers, trying to make up for that. But I think we tried to pivot quickly to those. We had merchants to try to explain what was going on and be very transparent about the capacity issues we were facing. And it's bad news, but it's transparent and it's regularly communicated versus. So there's a learning that I think we can still continue to do better just every day, as well as in a period like this. So that's something we're very focused on. Now, Ben, just on that question, I'm just interested in your view as well.
Yeah, so historically what we saw when I think about Australian consumers buying is about 30% of the time they go overseas. And we buy from three big lanes. We buy from the UK, we would be fashion and a little bit of cosmetics, but predominantly fashion. Out of China, we'd buy cheap consumer electronics, and out of the US, we'd buy fashion and beauty. What we've seen during the period, though, is we've seen a lot of that shift to Australian brands, because you can't get, and especially on the fashion and the beauty side, we saw really big growth in specialty fashion brands and some of the beauty brands. Everyone's sitting on video conferencing, so we still are buying beauty products even though we're at home. So it did shift across to Australian brands. So the inability to get a supply chain working is a great opportunity for Australian brands to cement their products in with Australian consumers. As these consumers are coming in, they can't buy from overseas because it is long and timely to get it in. So it is a great opportunity for Australian brands right at the moment to cement their product.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And my last question, Sarah, I do have a number of questions here in front of me from the audience, but just the last thing, one of the things for Australia Post, we dusted off we had business continuity plans. I don't know how, it's the old story about until you pull the ripcord on the parachute, you haven't tested the plan. And so getting them out very quickly in those early days and then trying to execute on them. But what have you learned from this period? What's the one or two things that, if, God forbid, we face something like this again, but something that is a big disruption, that have you thought through having some things in place, some plans in place to manage?
Yeah, we've been talking about that ourselves, and I think the biggest thing is just to not feel like to just start the planning process. You're never going to know what's going to happen either side, but have your plans and your steps all the way out. I think that was really helpful that, once we rolled out phase 2, we'd already written 3, 4, 5. We knew what it was going to look like. We could just continue to roll out, as opposed to the continual shock of like, oh my God, now this is happening and this is happening. I think the other thing that I would do next time is heed the early warnings. So our suppliers in China were talking about things, but seriously downplaying what was happening. And I think just having a more proactive view on your supply chain, that would be my 2 things, is plan more aggressively than you think you have to, and have more visibility and more meetings with your supply chain partners.
I think that's great. That's great feedback. I don't know, we had a group of customers together in very early March and trying to anticipate what would happen through Easter. Back in very early days, you may have been there actually, but very early days, and we really didn't know what was going to play out. And I think there are a lot of learnings for all of us from that 4th of March to now. And I think for us, business continuity planning and doing more rehearsals is one. So having it documented, but actually, what if a facility goes down is out? Let's actually do a rehearsal versus not just a desktop piece. So that's something we've certainly taken away. Now, I do have some questions. I'm going to tackle the first one, and I think there will be a few of these. Now, we spoke about resilience, but transparency and communication being really important. And I think we started as quickly as we could to get on top of that, and even the way we were doing tracking and getting more information out. But the first question is, how are we going to resolve delivery delays? So I think we've made great progress in this. If I talk domestically first, we're in much better shape now. We're retaining the extra 8 freighters and the 16 pop-ups. We're getting, each night we are seeing significant volumes, tonnage in the air, but unless there's a weather event, which is typical of any time of year in any period, we're coping with those much better, and we're seeing much better delivery service levels now. There are still pockets. We clearly can't get into some places like Far North Queensland, Northern Territory, and the Western WA, Far North Western WA. And there are some of our partners like bus networks are not operating, and we use those as well. So we've found contingencies wherever we can, and there'll be some delays in pockets, but we've seen a significant improvement. Internationally, we've also got on top of what was a massive capacity issue and chartered extra capacity. The issue is, staying on top of that, and I'm sort of confident that we can, whilst we anticipate demand. But at the other end, with the postal service at the other side, we're seeing delays in some countries of a number of days or weeks. So we get it landed, and then trying to then get it out and into the final mile is a challenge. And we're looking at, again, contingencies to work around that and really leveraging our relationships with postal partners around the world. So it is a work in progress. It has absolutely improved domestically and is in much better shape. And we're very focused on how do we get back to what I'd call a BAU. I know Ben's raising this all the time with us about getting back to a BAU service level that is going to be in the new normal. So we have to meet the expectations that we were meeting in the old normal and not in peak, because we're now almost in peak every day, as some customers are saying. The second question is, Farah, how important is physical proximity of inventory to the receiver?
Is that, sorry, who was that question to? I was like,
how important is physical proximity of inventory to the receiver, to your customer? Like having forward stock locations. If you don't have a view, that's okay, but that was a question that someone asked.
Sorry, I was just thinking because we only have the one DC. So, I mean, all I can speak of is sellouts, which is probably not what this question is. But in terms of like, you want to make sure that you have your best stock in stock, which is very difficult at the moment. But in terms of having multiple DCs, this is something that we're investigating, because obviously the more you can get out same day, the better. I think that customers, like the guys were saying before, they want their packages now. They don't want it tomorrow or the next day. They forgot to order it and they want it now. So, yeah, I think that proximity is essential, but I'm not sure that I'm the best person to speak to it because we've only got the one DC.
Yeah, so it probably close to me a little bit, Gary.
Yep.
Yeah, so and what we've seen overseas, and it's interesting now to think of what potentially the pandemic has changed, but what you see overseas is proximity and same-day delivery does grow out over the journey. On Amazon's great at doing it for their Prime members. And so once you get on that sugar of same-day delivery, it's hard as a consumer to get off it. You mentioned your daughter and the sugar hit. It's probably better than eating chocolate. But the sugar hit of the gift coming, if that now comes same day, it's even a bigger sugar hit to some degree. We were kind of predicting that it could sort of get somewhere between 5 to 10% of total volume might move towards a same-day type delivery over the next few years. But we're not sure now, given the pandemic impact, whether that's been slowed or once we get back into norm, whether that will come through. So it's a hard one to predict. You see a lot of the big retailers doing pick from store to be able to do a convenience delivery perspective. Obviously, Amazon's opened up 3 warehouses in Australia, being Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, so we know that that's out in the press as they want to continue to push down the speed and its impact. So I still think it will be important, and I still think thinking about how you do that will be very important from a retailer's perspective.
And one thing I've observed, and Paul, you may have done a view on this, but it differs by country because of the demographic and population density. In the UK, I remember speaking to at the time, the Chief Digital Officer of one of the department stores here, who was English, lamenting the fact that he could have something delivered to his house in country England the same day. But of course, that was an hour out of London. It's a perspective just on how Australia deals with that, given the size of the country and the population relative population density.
Yeah, I mean, Australia's demography, 25 million people in a landmass the size of North America, was and is always going to be a challenge for pure play. And when I got into it, well, in the 90s, everyone said, well, this will never fly. Well, what we are seeing is, investment from businesses like yours, and Ben referenced Amazon, who seem to be having a full go now, that where there's a will, there's a way. And increasingly, it's interesting. Sarah's built a very successful business on a single DC model. Obviously, being close to the customer, demand planning is on her agenda. And I'd love to see, I suppose, a very cost-effective and cogent sort of fulfillment by Amazon or someone else model that will allow sort of growing merchants like Sarah to have those touch points in the various capital cities across Australia. But for now, I think customers, if they're engaged with a brand, love the product, love the service, they'll wait. Ben, I agree with you. I think that sugar rush of same-day shipping has definitely got us all going. But I think there's still plenty of business to be had, in the normal sort of single DC model, especially as you move up the value chain.
As you say, like, how do you... I was just going to say about inventory.
Sarah, I'll moderate here. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say about inventory. Like, how much money do you want to spend in inventory, and is it worth the extra day? So, like, when Express goes back to normal and it's overnight, like, is it even worth holding millions and millions more dollars of inventory all around Australia so you can improve by half a day? I don't know that. I think our customers would prefer a lower price and better options than the half-day improvement.
Yeah, and I agree with
Sarah, on that
Sarah
note, sorry, go Ben.
Sorry, Gary. Predictability, I think, is still a trump over speed. Being able to say it's going to come tomorrow or it's going to be able to come in 2 days, and being predictable. So when the consumer buys, they know exactly when they get it. I still think that's critically important over speed. And so that's really important, is when you're setting up a shopping cart scenario, that the consumer knows if they buy now, it's going to be there on Tuesday next week. And then commit to it. And that's something that needs to be done across the entire supply chain. Sarah talks about how important Australia Post is to her brand, and that's on us too.
There's no question of that, the connection with the brand and that last mile experience. I do want to correct you, Ben. Whilst, yes, the sugar hit may be better than chocolate, not when it's on my credit card for my daughter. I've only got time for one more question. There are many more, and I apologise we can't get to them all. But I guess it's for Ben. And how has COVID-19 impacted the last mile, and what changes are likely to stay?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the impacts on COVID, and probably one of the biggest impact has just been the pure volume. No one would have predicted that we'd have this volume in April, and when we think about how we normally ramp up for peak, we're in peak preparation like every retailer is for 8 months. We get out of one peak and then start the process for ramping up for peak almost immediately after that. And we only had a week or so, not even a week's warning of obviously the COVID. I remember sitting in a big meeting room with all our leaders the day before the Australian Grand Prix got cancelled, and then the Australian Grand Prix got cancelled, and it completely changed the landscape. Within weeks, everyone was at home and the whole shopping boom took off. So time and to get to the supply chain has been critical, and I'm pleased to know that our service performance numbers are getting very, very close to good service performance numbers now over the last couple of weeks, and we do track them daily. So volume has been a big thing. The second big impact has been access to passenger flights, being able to move volume around by planes, and we've added a number of freighters on to be able to cope with the volume. But until the airlines truly get back up and operating, especially when you talk international outbound, there's still going to be ongoing impacts, and people should be aware of that and should be planning for those ongoing impacts. But actually at the last mile delivery, what we've seen is, in terms of the final handover to consumer, we've seen a lot more people working from home. So first time delivery has really gone up. Being able to get the parcel into the hands of the consumer because they're at home has really increased. We've not seen a dramatic decrease in that dreaded card like this ever before. So the number of cards being left behind, even though it's a very good value proposition, has dramatically decreased. So consumers are getting their parcels first time, which is great. We've implemented contactless delivery. So our drivers aren't now handing the parcel over, asking you to sign on glass. They're handing it over, saying, is it okay that I can sign on your behalf? And we're doing that. So it's contactless delivery right at the delivery end too. And some of those things will stay. I think we're going to be in this version of contactless delivery for a period of time, because the stats indicate that the human contact actually is very important for the wave 2 of COVID. And even the flu numbers are right down, the common cold numbers are right down because we've been in isolation. So I think some of those things will definitely stay, Gary.
Right. Well, and I do too. And I think the last thing I'd say on that is just collection points. We've seen a very broad range of views from retailers wanting click and collect, not wanting it parcel lock, just more and more options for collection outside home delivery. And albeit we've had a huge swing from into home, from even CBD locations, people getting delivered to work because they're at work, that will slowly switch back over time. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on that as even ways of working change and people will work from home than they did previously. So look, we have run out of time and I'd love to continue, but we're now at the end of the hour. So there's no doubt from everything we've heard today that things have been impacted by COVID-19, and some for good, and there'll be changes to the way consumers engage retailers, and this presents opportunities as well as some challenges. So retailers, whilst they are investing in their digital channels and really focused on exceptional customer service, it's not just that digital channel, and as Paul points out, there's a digital experience in-store as well that many are investing in. But what we've also learned, and I suspect most of you have, is that the pandemic's highlighted the need for businesses to be more agile and have contingencies across their supply chain. Sarah spoke a little bit about contingency planning to ensure continuity and survival. So I'd like to really thank our panellists for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us today and share their experience with us. And thanks to all of you, and of course to Ben for sharing some of the stats, and you'll hear more about that in the coming days. And thank all of you for joining for our first webinar in this series. The next webinar is a great follow-on from today's discussion. It's about attracting and retaining more online shoppers. We spoke about those 200,000 that traded, sort of transacted for the first time in April, and how to continue to attract, but also importantly retain. And we'll have some e-commerce experts who will share tips on how to grow your online business post the pandemic. So thank you very much for joining us today. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.